By now, you might have some clarity. You understand the emptiness. You recognize the exhaustion. You can even name what isn't working. And yet, nothing changes. You can see the problem. You can think about it endlessly. But you're still stuck. Not because you're lazy, and not because you're afraid. You're stuck because something inside you is pulling in two directions at once. And when that happens, movement becomes almost impossible. That's what we're talking about today. Not how to get unstuck, but what being stuck actually is. Is confusing because you have clarity. You understand what's wrong. You can explain it. You can articulate the problem in precise terms, and yet you can't move. That feels like failure. Because we're taught that clarity should lead to action, that once you know what's wrong, you should be able to fix it. But knowing and acting are two very different things. You can know your job is draining you and still be unable to leave. You can know a relationship isn't working and still be unable to end it. You can know you need to make a change and still not be able to take the first step. Not because you're weak, but because you're not dealing with one clear desire. You're dealing with competing pulls, opposing needs, contradictory imperatives. And when those pulls are evenly matched, they cancel each other out. That's paralysis. And it's not a problem of insufficient understanding. It's a problem of structure. The structure of internal conflict. Internal conflict happens when two parts of you want incompatible things. One part wants freedom. Another wants security. One part wants honesty. Another wants acceptance. One part wants to leave. Another doesn't want to hurt anyone. Both parts are real. Both have reasons for existing. Both are trying to protect something important. The problem is that they can't both be satisfied at the same time. So you end up in gridlock. You move toward one option, and the other pulls you back. You consider making a change, and immediately the counter-argument appears. Every choice feels like a betrayal of something important. So, you don't choose. Here's what that looks like in practice. You're in a stable career. It pays well. It's respected. But it drains you. You know you want out. But leaving means uncertainty, financial risk, explaining yourself to people who won't understand, starting over. So you stay. And the moment you commit to staying, the other side activates. The part that knows this isn't sustainable. That feels the cost every day. That sees the years slipping away. And you're back where you started, torn. I want to, but I should. This is the pattern most people recognize. I want to leave, but I should be grateful. I want to stop pretending, but I should keep things stable. I want to prioritize myself, but I should take care of everyone else first. The structure matters. The want is real. It's not selfish or immature. It's coming from a place that knows what's sustainable for you. The should is real too. It's internalized responsibility, identity, obligation. And the but between them is where you get stuck, because neither side is wrong. Here's a micro-contradiction people rarely name. You want to be authentic, but you also want to belong. And sometimes authenticity threatens belonging. Being fully yourself might mean losing acceptance, losing connection, losing your place in the systems you're part of. So you adjust. You soften, you edit yourself to fit. And that works until it doesn't. until the cost of belonging becomes higher. Then the cost of authenticity. But by then, you've built a life around the adjusted version of yourself, and dismantling that feels impossible. Here's another. You want to change, but you also want to remain a good person. And in your mind, good people don't abandon commitments. They don't let people down. They don't prioritize themselves over others. So change becomes framed as selfishness, as betrayal, as moral failure. And that framing, that internal judgment, keeps you locked in place. Not because you're actually being selfish, but because the idea of being selfish is unbearable. Why opposing forces create paralysis? When you move toward one option, the other side activates. You consider change and immediately feel the risks, the uncertainty, the loss. You stay where you are and immediately feel the cost, the stagnation, the wasted time. Back and forth, toward and away. And eventually, your system stops moving. Not because you're indecisive, but because movement in either direction feels like loss. And when both options involve loss, your mind does the only thing it can. It stays neutral. It holds the tension. It keeps both sides in balance. It prevents either from winning. And that balance, that refusal to choose, is what paralysis is. Not a lack of information, not a lack of courage, but an inability to accept that any choice will require sacrifice. The cost of unresolved conflict. Living in unresolved conflict is exhausting. You're constantly managing tension, holding balance, preventing either side from taking over. That drains energy. It narrows your focus. It makes even small decisions feel heavy, because every decision, no matter how minor, activates the same underlying conflict. Should you say yes or no? Should you stay or go? Should you speak up or stay quiet? And every time you have to choose, you're reminded of the larger conflict underneath, the one you still haven't resolved, the one you're not sure how to resolve. And over time, that constant activation of the same tension becomes the background condition of your life. You're not just managing your external circumstances. You're managing the conflict inside you. And that takes more energy than most people realize. Why this isn't fear or laziness. When people feel stuck like this, they often assume it's fear, that they're too scared to take a risk, too comfortable to make a change, too weak to do what needs to be done. But that's not what this is. Fear points in one direction. It says, "Don't do that, it's dangerous." Internal conflict points in multiple directions at once. It says, "This option is dangerous, but so is staying where you are." It's not that you're afraid of change. It's that both options, changing and not changing, feel like a threat. And when that's the case, fear isn't the problem. Conflict is. The same is true for laziness. People think they're stuck because they're not trying hard enough, not disciplined enough, not motivated enough. But this isn't about effort. When two internal forces are pulling in opposite directions, no amount of effort will move you forward. Because the effort itself is divided. Half of you is pushing, the other half is resisting. And the result is that you stay in place, not because you're lazy, but because your system is locked. Modern life and multiple possibilities. Modern life offers endless options, more career paths than any previous generation, more ways to live, more identities to try on. And psychologically, that creates pressure, because every choice you make closes other doors. You choose one path, and you're haunted by the others. You imagine the lives you didn't live, the versions of yourself you didn't become, and that constant awareness of alternatives keeps part of you elsewhere. Always somewhere else, always questioning, always wondering if you made the right call. And that split attention fuels conflict, because you're never fully committed to the life you're living. You're always comparing it to the lives you could be living. And when you're living one life while imagining another, neither feels real. Here's what happens over time. Clarity becomes a substitute for movement. You spend so much time analyzing the conflict, understanding it, mapping it, thinking through every angle, that the analysis itself starts to feel like progress. You're not stuck anymore. You're working on it. You're figuring it out. But years pass, and nothing changes, because understanding the conflict is not the same as resolving it. And at some point, the clarity stops being useful. It becomes a way to stay in the conflict without having to face the discomfort of actually choosing. Why conflict doesn't fade? Internal conflicts don't resolve on their own. They go underground. They become chronic. And eventually, they feel normal. You forget what it's like to not be torn, to feel aligned, to move without constant internal resistance. And that's how paralysis becomes a default state. Here's another reason people stay stuck for years: the hidden cost of stability. Staying where you are, even when it's not working, keeps your identity coherent. You know who you are in this job, in this relationship, in this life. And that coherence, even if it's limiting, feels safer than the alternative. Because leaving would mean losing that coherent identity. It would mean becoming someone you don't recognize yet. And that loss, the loss of a known self, is terrifying. Not because the new self would be worse, but because it's unknown. And humans are wired to avoid the unknown, even when the known is painful. Here's a third scenario. You're in a relationship that's stable but no longer alive. You care about the person, but the connection feels distant, mechanical. You know you're not happy, but you also know that leaving would devastate them, would disrupt both of your lives, would require explanations you don't have. So you stay, and you tell yourself it's loyalty, responsibility, love. But underneath, it's conflict between your need for aliveness and your need to not cause harm, between your desire for freedom and your commitment to the bond you made. And that conflict, real, valid, impossible to resolve cleanly, keeps you paralyzed. What paralysis is pointing to? Paralysis doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're facing a real dilemma. Both sides are telling you something important. One side says something needs to change, that the way you're living isn't sustainable, that you can't keep going like this. The other side says something valuable is at risk, that you have reasons for staying where you are, that there's something worth protecting, and both are true. That's why the conflict exists, not because you're failing, not because you're confused, but because the situation itself is genuinely difficult. There's no easy answer, no clear path forward, no option that doesn't involve loss. And recognizing that Recognizing that you're dealing with a real dilemma, not a personal failure, is important because it means the paralysis isn't a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that you're standing at a threshold, and thresholds are hard to cross. So if you're stuck, knowing what's wrong but unable to move, you're not weak. You're not lazy. You're not procrastinating. You're in a real internal conflict between what you want and what you think you should want, between change and stability, between freedom and security, between yourself and your responsibilities. And that conflict doesn't have a simple resolution. It's not about choosing the right option, because there isn't one. It's about understanding that both sides of you are valid, and that being torn doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're facing something genuinely difficult. We'll keep exploring what makes choice so hard, why modern freedom creates psychological weight, why having options can feel like a burden. But for now, it's enough to recognize this. Paralysis is not laziness. It's not fear. It's not indecision. It's what happens when two real needs collide. And that collision is worth understanding.